Hello and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Kish, and I'm a Family Resource Management Extension Specialist at Kansas State University. I will be moderating today's webinar. Our focus today is on keeping financial records secure. What are the records, why keep them secure, and how to do that? This is important because, as we know, theft of personal and financial information is always a risk. During times of disaster or personal emergencies, having quick, secure access to personal and financial information is also important. That's why when Virginia Morgan White from the Extension Disaster Education Network contacted me in my role as one of the leaders of the E-Extension Financial Security for All Community of Practice about the possibility of our two groups collaborating on today's webinar, it was a no-brainer. It is also timely because October has been designated as National Cybersecurity Awareness Month by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Our presenters for today's webinar are Sarah Kroimans and Lori Sharmer. And Sarah is a family resiliency educator, University of Minnesota Extension, and Lori is Family Economics Specialist, North Dakota State University Extension. Our third presenter is Steve Judd, and you'll see his picture further down the line, and he's Manager of Information Technology and Distance Education at the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension. Lori and Sarah were part of a team that produced the award-winning Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit. They are also members of the Financial Security for All Community of Practice, and Steve is a member of the Network Literacy Community of Practice. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that interaction will be via the chat pod, and this webinar is also being recorded. As we go along, we will have two polls for you to complete, and at the end of the webinar, we will have a few questions we'd like you to respond to. So more about the polls and the end of session questions as we get to them. So again, welcome to today's webinar, and let's get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is Lori. We're going to start our conversation today about the important financial and personal records by identifying what they are. What are those important papers that we need to find a place to keep them secure? Certainly personal and family information, certainly identification and birth and marriage and divorce records, property papers, financial papers, legal papers, anything that designates ownership or legal or financial status are very important. Some of the other things you might consider would be contracts. Do you have a contract with somebody? Household inventories are important. We've all done those household inventories, but we need to keep them in a safe place should we need them following a disaster. Any wills or advance directives, durable powers of attorney for healthcare, all of those are considered important records that need to be kept secure so that we can have them available very quickly should we need following a disaster or any event in our life that we need to use those papers. We want to be able to put our hands on them quickly. I'm going to start by doing a poll and asking you where you keep your important records. If you just want to take a minute and just kind of tell us, okay, right now, where have I got all of those important records for our family and personal information? Very interesting. We have, looks like the filing cabinet and the home safe box are taking the lead. Great, and like it says, you can choose all that apply. Okay, that home filing cabinet is way out in front. thank you for doing that poll. Looks like you all have places to keep those important papers. One of the things we listed on the poll was your wallet or your purse. We don't always think of that as a place to store important papers, but there are some things that need to be carried with us all the time, such as our driver's license or some form of identification. We need credit card or two. We need health information, health insurance, car insurance information. Those types of things need to be kept with us. So we keep what's important to keep with us, but then we are careful not to keep things that maybe don't need to be kept in a wallet, which maybe isn't as secure as a home system. So certainly we don't want to keep our Social Security cards in our wallets. Just be conscious of what really needs to be in the wallet and purse and what can be left in a more secure place elsewhere. And as we look at home filing systems, they can be a great place to store not only our current files, but our permanent files. And some of our papers we're using on a continual basis. They're important, but it's something that we need to have readily available to us. So setting up some type of home filing system, whether it's a filing drawer like we have pictured here, or a home safe, it could just be some filing boxes. Any system will work that fits for your family and your needs. The most important part is actually having a system to keep those records in some type of order so that they could easily be accessed. When we look at our home filing system, of course we have, like I said, those current files that we need to use on a regular basis. We have those permanent files, those things that we just need to keep forever. We need to have a place to keep those. And then we have those dead storage files that we really don't need, but we want to keep. Don't need to be accessed, but we need to find a place to store them for the future. And then we have those files that we no longer need. It's important not to keep our filing system all cluttered up with those files that could be destroyed, and destroying them in a manner that protects our personal identity by shredding or burning, possibly. We had some on our poll that said they use a USB drive or a jump drive, or maybe even a cloud to store their records, and we'll be hearing more about that later in our webinar today. Now we also want to talk about using a safe deposit box or even a home safe. There are those papers that would be very hard to replace or maybe even impossible to replace. And keeping them stored in a safe place that is fireproof, waterproof, burglar-proof would be a great way to ensure that we don't lose those files, those important papers. So whether we choose a safe deposit box, which is held at a financial institution, or keeping a safe at home, it can be a full safe like we have pictured here. We can even find smaller fire boxes that are lockable, but maybe a little less expensive, but a place to keep those records safe in our homes. We might need to consider the pros and cons of keeping a safety deposit box, which is off-site, when it's in a bank or a financial institution. Of course, those institutions are only open during business hours, and so we might need to keep that in mind when we're choosing which records to keep there. We also need to keep in mind if the safety deposit box is not a joint account, then only the person's name on the account or on the box can have access to it, and if there is a death, that may delay getting into that information. So keep those things in mind when you are choosing where to keep your important papers. Sarah, I think I'm going to turn it over to you to
Thank
do
you,
the rest
Lori.
of our presentation.
Thank you. This is Sarah Kryman, so with University of Minnesota Extension. And so now we're going to talk a few minutes about how long do we actually keep records. Lori talked just a minute ago about current permanent dead storage and destroying files. And so let's think about how long are some factors to consider. So there's some items that we might need to keep just for a short period of time, so temporarily. So these would be items that are awaiting action of some sort. And once we take that action, the document probably isn't very useful. And so that might be a credit card receipt. We would probably need to keep those until they're matched with a bill to be certain that the charge was really a real charge, it was legitimate, and for the proper amount. And so other bills we might keep until we've paid them in full, and then we get rid of them. So some things we keep just a very short period of time. Some things we might keep for about a year, so they have a limited life. So those are the files that can be discarded at the end of that year. So for example, a household budget. We might do that on a yearly basis. Bank or credit union statements we may keep for just a year. And especially now, most folks have access to online statements with their financial institutions, so keeping those paper copies might not be as important. Homeowner or auto insurance policies, keeping those until they expire and the new policies are put into effect. So those types of things we can probably get rid of in 1 year and eliminate some of that clutter. Then there are some documents that we may want to keep for multiple years, and these are the documents that serve as a record for proof of payment or transactions. That might be tax returns. And with those, we probably want to keep multiple years, 3 to 6 years, maybe even longer. The title to a car, definitely we want to keep that until the car is sold, transferred, or discarded. Mortgage contracts and receipts for home improvements and until the mortgage is paid in full or until the house is sold or all claims of major damage are settled. Another example would be deeds until the property is sold or transferred. Then there are documents that we want to keep indefinitely, and those would represent payments or original records that do not change. Birth certificates, marriage, divorce certificates, death certificates, adoption papers, military discharge papers, naturalization papers. Those we are going to want to keep for a long period of time. We keep lists of so many things in our lives, and it's also important to keep a list or an inventory of those important papers. And so knowing what documents we have, where they're stored, is so very important. And they serve the purpose of guiding you and others in the case of an emergency. It can really save time, trouble, money, and probably a lot of frustration if one has an inventory or a list of where their important papers are stored. It's a good idea to keep one copy of the list in a convenient spot in your home, probably in your home files, and then include a photocopy in your safe deposit box or fireproof, waterproof, or burglar-proof home safe. Be sure to share with a trusted family member or a significant other where that list is, so that that is a shared knowledge, so that if the primary person who helps or who manages the important paper storage, if they are no longer there or they're not available, that somebody else knows where the important papers are. A good record-keeping system with an up-to-date inventory will definitely allow someone who's unfamiliar with the system to locate important documents. So we're going to do another poll, and we are interested if you have a grab-and-go box or a red file that can be taken quickly in an event of an emergency. So there we go, in the event of an emergency. And we do give a third option there. If you don't have one, do you plan to develop one? All right. It looks like we have some folks with good intentions of developing a plan. And almost 50-50 on yes and no. Or almost a third and a third and a third here. All right. Well, it's always good to have that grab and go file, and if you don't have one, hopefully you might be motivated to develop one. So why is it important to have that grab and go box or the red file? Well, definitely it will help your family rebuild if records are destroyed or lost. So if you live in an area prone to natural disaster that could require an evacuation, a grab and go box is really important. And even if you don't live in an area that's prone to natural disasters, it's probably a good idea to have that information because having access to that after disaster is really important. So how do you develop it? Well, it could look a lot of different ways. In the photograph, you see a red file there, and so information could be stored in that. But we want the box or the file to be accessible. We want it in a place where it can be quickly grabbed, not in a place located in the back of the closet where it's difficult to find when it needs to be taken real quickly. It should be durable as well as waterproof. So a sealed waterproof box or backpack, maybe items in Ziploc bags that would protect them is very important. So in this grab and go box or red file, we want to make sure that we have the necessary things that we would need in the case of an emergency. So in addition to medical prescriptions, including those for eyeglasses, copies of our children's immunization records, as well as our own, copies of insurance cards and policies, front and backs of credit cards. So we have those 800 numbers if we need them. Also to think about traveler's checks or some cash in case credit cards aren't available because perhaps the electricity is down and the credit card machines aren't working, or ATM machines aren't working and the banks are closed. So probably in addition, copies of tax forms, so the federal 1040, probably for the last 3 years would be a good idea. Copy of a household inventory, which would have a list of serial numbers and purchase prices. And then some of those long-term items that we discussed earlier. So any wills or durable powers of attorney, any deeds, marriage, birth certificates, all of those things, military discharge papers. The list of information in a grab and go box is really pretty extensive, and it really needs to be, because it's really meant to help your family regroup, reorganize if the home gets destroyed and you don't have access to it for a long period of time. So now we're going to ask folks to respond to these questions in the chat box over on the left-hand side. So we know that people know it's important to secure their important papers. But as we saw in the question about the grab and go box, not everybody has that. So what are the barriers that folks encounter? And what might motivate people to take action to secure their important papers? So in the chat box on the left, go ahead and type. I see several people are typing. So you would type in the little white box, put your cursor in there, and then hit the return button. Valeria says lack of time and interest. Time is huge. Takes a lot of effort. Definitely time is one of those super valuable items that no matter who you are, we all only have 24 hours in a day. It seems overwhelming, not understanding the importance of the task. Oh, Steve, yes, it won't happen to me, right? I'll never be in a natural disaster. Time is a barrier. Procrastination is huge. Oh, it seems like too much stuff. Oh, so motivation might be hearing from someone who has been in a disaster and has experienced that. don't understand the importance or the prioritization needed. Yes, it can be overwhelming. Oh, the distance to the bank and the bank hours, definitely. That can be a barrier for folks. Or even having the documents necessary to do that. Yes, Marcia, sounds like a great idea, but other aspects of life take priority. Yes. Virginia recommends to break it up into small tasks. Do one little piece at a time. That's great advice. That experience is the best motivator for the future. Hopefully folks don't need to experience that. All right, wonderful responses. Thank you for sharing those. So what happens if folks do not have their valuable papers, records secured, and something happens, such as this tornado on the screen? What do we do if items are lost, damaged, or destroyed? Well, in the Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit that was mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there is a wonderful section that talks about how to replace important papers. So if you have lost your birth certificate, your driver's license, military papers, it goes step by step on who to contact and how to go about doing that. Now, if folks think that developing or securing their important papers can be overwhelming, it can be even more overwhelming to have to do it after the fact, after a disaster. So we encourage you to go to this URL for the Family Financial Toolkit. Check out that section and know if you don't have those documents currently, or if you find yourself in an unfortunate situation where you need to replace those, the information is there. We have also, Lori and I have provided just a real quick list of URLs here of important, which we think are good resources. So the first is Organizing Your Important Papers. And this is a great publication on eXtension that has lots of really great information. Again, we've listed the Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit. The University of Minnesota Extension has a page on preparing for disasters, and there are some great resources there as well. And Lori has identified 2 resources from North Dakota State University Extension Service: what to keep, where, and for how long, and a great piece on developing that inventory of important papers. So we encourage folks to go ahead and check out these resources. I am finished with my part, so I believe I might be passing it on to Steve.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth, Lori, and Sarah. I learned something new, which is always good for me. And I'd just like to ask people, as I present today, I hate to present things just because I think I learn as much from the people that are here participating as you'll learn from me, hopefully. So please feel free to share in the chat pod any questions, comments. If you have suggestions that I didn't think of, that would be great. My name's Steve Judd. I work at the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension, and I believe I was asked to be a part of this webinar because of my involvement with the Network Literacy Community of Practice. Today I'm going to be talking mostly about the role that digital storage can play in helping to keep your important records secure. I noticed in the first poll that about half of the people said that they have important documents on their computers, and so I think that's probably logical in this day and age. And many people said that they had them on a portable hard drive or a USB thumb drive, and some people, maybe it might have only been one person, said they had things stored in the cloud. We're going to talk a little bit about what each of those things is, and I'm going to focus on sort of a high-level overview about the principles that you should take into consideration in using any of these forms of digital storage, and not really get too far down into the weeds of the sort of geeky tech stuff, although I'm certainly happy to do that if people have those sorts of questions. So when we think about digital storage, there are advantages and disadvantages, just like with anything. And the things that I think of are that they are can be stored in a very small space, that we can automate the process by which our papers are backed up or our records are backed up. And when we were talking about some of the barriers to people actually creating these or storing these financial records, one of the barriers is time and sort of that impetus to do it. So if we can make it easier to do that, I think that may play a role in encouraging people. We also may be able to store things off-site so that they're tax lawyer or have a business partner. Sometimes having your financial records in a form digital storage is people's comfort level with the storage. And one of the reasons for the discomfort is that it's hard to know exactly who has access to those digital files. It requires a certain amount of trust, understanding of the technology before you're comfortable with it. If you have a sheet of paper in your hand, you can feel pretty comfortable that it's not available to someone else, but once you put that file onto a computer, because we can no longer really see the little bits in there, we may feel a little bit less comfortable about who can actually see my stuff. So security and trust become very important issues. So the first thing I want to talk about is your home computer. This is not a picture of my desk, although my desk doesn't look much better than that. But you likely have important information stored on your computer. And that may be financial records. Perhaps you use an accounting program like Quicken or QuickBooks, or you get your bank statements via email, something like that. So some of your stuff is likely on your computer. But we need to consider what that means. Would we consider your home computer to be a safe place to store material that you need to have in the event of an emergency? And there are a number of reasons why it may not be. I work in IT, so I know, and I'm sure all of you know, computers don't always do what you expect them to do. And so in the event of a hard drive failure or an infection with a virus, you can lose the files that are on your computer. Or with viruses and malware, you may actually just lose control of the files that are on your computer, sometimes without really knowing it. So it's important to practice good security and computing practices to avoid that. I like to, I guess I shouldn't say like, it makes me sound sadistic, but I think it's important that people consider what would happen if someone walked in, picked up your computer, and walked out with it. Would they actually have access to the information that's on your computer? So, things to consider are, do I need to encrypt my computer? And a lot of this is focused on what's the worst case scenario, right? So even though things may not be likely, we do want to have in the back of our minds, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? So suppose you stored all of your financial records on your home computer. What happens if your computer is destroyed in a flood or a fire or tornado, other natural disaster? And equally importantly, when you are done using your computer, what steps do you take to actually dispose of the device and to make sure that the files that you have on there are not accessible to other people? Barbast is it better to have a solid state computer instead of a hard drive? And so I'll, just because I am a little bit geeky, I'll just sort of rephrase that. Many newer drives use a form of flash memory that does not have moving parts in it. It's fully electronic, whereas our traditional old hard drives have, if some of you are as old as I am, you remember records that spun around on a turntable. And so the older hard drives and many of the new ones use spinning disks, and there's actually physical moving parts. And those are more prone to failure than are the solid state drives. So in general, solid state drives are more reliable, but that doesn't mean that they're 100% reliable. And Karen was asking about, is a good overall password enough? And I guess I would say not exactly, because oftentimes you'll sit in front of your computer, type in a password, and it lets you onto the computer, and so we think, oh, it's secure. But something to consider is if I take the hard drive out of the computer and plug it into another one, is the data on the computer actually encrypted or not visible to someone unless they have that password? So, an additional step that can be taken, some programs, some of the financial programs, like say a QuickBooks or Quicken, may actually encrypt your files and only open them when presented with the correct password. You can actually do that for your entire computer. So you are able to make it so that if someone were to get your computer without your password, there's just gibberish. They'd have no way of knowing what's on there. I'm going to move forward, and we'll keep coming back to some of these questions as we go forward. I really appreciate that that you guys are putting that in there, and we'll definitely try and get to all of those questions as we move through. Another thing that came up, I noticed in the first poll, is that many people use a portable hard drive or maybe a USB drive, and again, these are good ways of storing your information, potentially away from your home computer. So again, we talked about what happens if my home computer is destroyed, stolen, breaks, If you back everything up to a portable hard drive and you keep it on top of your computer in the same location, then whatever happens, if there's a disaster and something happens to your home, now both of your copies are in jeopardy of being lost. So, if we're going to do that, we probably want to consider storing them in separate locations. Maybe, putting your important documents onto a hard drive or a USB drive and storing them at a bank account or in a safe deposit box, or maybe, at a family member's house that's further away from you. I remember hearing someone talk about one time that he made computer backups to a DVD and then sent them to his mother and just had her stick them. He encrypted them so no one could see them, said, here, just stick these in the closet. And she lived far enough away, he felt that was safe. I'm not sure my mother would take those if I mailed them to her. We also need to think about how reliable that storage mechanism is. I think USB drives and portable hard drives are pretty good, but again, if you're of the age, you may remember what it was like to have floppy disks or zip drives that you put your important document on, and then a year later, when you thought you needed it, you put it into your computer and you couldn't read the file. So we need to make sure that we have reliable devices. And similar to the questions about the computer is, what if someone had your USB thumb drive? Would they actually be able to get the data off of there? So if it was stolen, or if you misplaced it or lost it and someone else picked it up, there are actually USB thumb drives that have built-in encryption, so they can only be viewed if you type in the correct password. So they are a lot more expensive than just the $3 thumb drive that's hanging by the checkout at Staples, but they may be worth the investment for the security and the peace of mind of knowing that only you or someone with your password would actually be able to get that. And also similar to your home computer, what do you do when you're done with the device? Okay, so it's important to make sure that you've actually wiped all of the information off of your device before you get rid of it, because you don't want to just like give it to your child to take to school with their homework assignment on it, and then they lose it and all of your stuff is there, or pass it on in that way. So it's important to keep track of where those are. Valeria asked about a good password generator website. I use a product which is essentially free. I pay for the I think I pay $10 a year so that it'll work on my phone, but it's called LastPass, and it's a password manager. There are a number of them out there that will actually create passwords for you and also keep track of them. And the thing that I like about this particular service is it doesn't actually store your passwords on their hard drives. It's stored, so you have one master password that you have to remember, and then after that you can access all the passwords to your sites. You can also store secure notes and secure not really documents, but secure notes in there. And so it's a good service. But there are a number of them that are out there. One thing I will caution you is that if you are at an institution and you would want to check with sort of your IT folks to make sure that if you were going to use that in a work setting, that's an allowable thing to do. But for personal use, there's certainly no problem with it. Yeah, Virginia, at some point you do have to remember one password. And since essentially one password locks up all the rest, that one password should hopefully be a very tough one to guess. And that sort of brings us to the whole conversation about usernames and passwords. Even if you don't really think that you're keeping your financial records in a digital format, likely they are in a digital format somewhere. So that may be your credit card statements or your bank statements, or if you file your taxes electronically. A lot of your financial information is in a digital format. For the things that you have control of, you likely have to use a username and password to get into your account. And so when you decide to log into the bank, or to check on your credit card balance or any of those sorts of things, you're probably going to be entering a username and password. You really need to think about how secure those are. And so I might not worry too much about the password that I use for, say, I'm trying to think of one I don't really care about. I guess I care about most of them. But you may want to consider having different strength passwords for different sites. So if I have a password, if I have access to my bank accounts through the internet, I would like to make sure that that is a pretty strong password, because if someone else has there we go, Karen's got it. If I had a password to the Betty Crocker cooking site, I probably wouldn't be as worried. I might still not use the password that's on the screen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I wouldn't be quite as worried about someone getting in and seeing my Betty Crocker cooking site profile. But for other things, I would be. And you've likely heard in the news of a variety of services that may get hacked, where your user information is leaked out. Typically, that can include password information. Although sites that do things well won't necessarily leak your password information, it is possible. So you don't really want to use the same password for every site. And I know that that's something that in the past I have been guilty of. I think I've reformed myself at this point so that, especially using a password manager, I don't actually use the same password on any site. And in fact, I don't know most of my passwords. Elizabeth is asking, do you need a unique username for each site? It could be considered more secure to have a unique username for each site because if your information were to leak out from one site and you're using the same username on all the sites, it would be one less thing that they would need to know. So let's say, for example, you know, a lot of times if you use Gmail, if your username and password from some poorly run site gets leaked out, people may take and try and use that in Gmail just because they know once they have access to your email, they can actually get a lot more information and be able to get into other places. So having a unique username would be great. I don't think it's that important as long as you use a good password for all the sites. But it would be an additional level of security that you could do. Sharing passwords with other people in your family. Who else knows the password? This can be important to actually make sure someone else does know the password. So for example, if you have a lot of files stored digitally that are password protected and you're the only one who knows that password, there may be some folks, you know, if you're not available to provide that password, can you or significant other, your family, someone else important, access those files if they need them? So you need to consider how you, when securing your files, how you're going to make sure that in the event that you can't help out, that someone else would be able to access those files if they need to. One thing that I put down here that's becoming more and more common and is something that I would encourage people to look at is it's called two-factor authentication. And just to give you a very brief idea of how this works, if I gave you my username and password to my Google account, you would not be able to log in, even with my username and password, because in addition to those two things, you need to enter a unique code that's generated every 5 seconds or so, and that is only available on my phone or on my device. I do have a printout of some one-time use codes in my wallet in case my phone is dead and I need to use it. So two-factor authentication kind of ensures you that you won't be able to log in, that no one else would be able to log in even if they did have your username and password. I saw very few people respond to the idea of using cloud storage, although I did see a number of people who said they email files to themselves, and so in a sense you're using cloud storage whether you know it or not. When I talk about cloud, the cloud, it basically, I've heard people say it means storing your stuff on someone else's computer. And that's essentially what it is. You are trusting a service provider that is holding your files on their servers somewhere. I mean, they don't literally float around in the clouds. The files need to be stored somewhere. And in considering cloud storage, I think it's going to become more and more important way of storing things. The nice thing about it is that it's off-site. So even if your home or your computer or your paper files are destroyed, the chances of the cloud stored files being destroyed as well are pretty unlikely. Although, again, you want to make sure that it's a service provider that you believe is trustworthy. We need to look at two different aspects of security when we're dealing with the cloud. One is what I call security in transit. So in storing something in the cloud, the files need to move between your computer and the file servers out on the internet. And you want to make sure that as that is happening, that those are secure. Same could be true if you're downloading your statement from your bank or you're inputting, orders to your bank. You want to always make sure that that's being done over a secure channel. And so if you look in your web browser, typically what you'll see is a little padlock up in the address bar. It stands for HTTPS or secure. And that means that the information being passed between you and that site is encrypted and no one else is able to view it or tamper with it en route. The other thing is, what happens once your files get to the site? Are they secure while they're sitting on their servers? What would happen if someone got into their servers? Would they be able to see those files? So there are ways. Again, we talked a little bit about encryption. You can actually encrypt your files with your own username, with your own password before they're moved out into the internet, into the cloud, so that even if someone did get that file, they would not be able to see it. Most services don't make that the default. Most services manage that for you so that technically they are able to see the files that are on their servers. And so if they get served with a warrant or a lawsuit or something else, they would be able to provide those files to someone else. Some of that's changing as a result of some of the sort of surveillance information that's come out in the last couple of years, and there's more emphasis on having those be encrypted when they're out in the cloud. And just one more time to emphasize what encryption is, you can think of it as turning, it's a reversible process where you can take a whole bunch of text or pictures, images, anything else, turn them into gibberish, and as long as you know the correct password or the encryption key, you can turn it back into the original text or file format. So if someone gets that without the encryption key, they have essentially nothing, just a bunch of random noise. But whoever has that encryption key is able to see the actual contents of the file. One of the big reasons that the cloud has some appeal is because it's accessible from a large number of devices. So you may be able to access it from your phone, or you may be able to access it from a computer at the library or from a computer at your friend's house. So if you do experience a disaster and you've lost your, lost access to your home computer or to the documents that you have, if they're stored in the cloud, then you will likely be able to access them in another way. So I'm going to turn this over for questions, and that can be both for me or for Lori or for Sarah or for someone in the chat room. I'm going to scan through the chat room to see if there were some questions I missed, but please feel free to type in if you have some additional questions here. I'd love to hear people's thoughts.
And as you are thinking about your questions, we just want to, would also like to share this screenshot of the Eden Extension Disaster Education Network page that talks about the various topics of information that you can find there. And family preparedness is clearly one of the topics. We would also like to take this opportunity right now to ask you, if you don't have any questions, but also to respond to some questions that we have for you. And I will type these, put the first one in the chat box, and we'll use Twitter chat formatting convention, which is I put Q1, and when you're responding to that, you put A1 in as your answer. So I'll go ahead and put the first question up. And then I see that Lori and Sarah, there's a question here about the Family Financial Toolkit video. So if you want to go ahead, and answer that, you can turn your mics on too. Take yourselves off mute.
Oh, great. I missed the question about the videos. We are in the process of developing videos with extension that will support the tools. 5 or 6 videos, I can never remember. And my colleague Lori Hendrickson and Trish Olson just presented at the National Eden Conference this last week, and we will be rolling those out and making them available. Anybody attending AFCC in November, there will be a session there. Definitely get information out. And they will be survivors and professionals who work with those survivors.
Thanks for your response. You kind of went in and out a little bit, so I'll try to paraphrase. But you were saying that the videos will soon be available, and for people who are going to the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education, you'll be talking. Some members of your team will be talking about it there, and I'm sure that through Eden there'll also be information coming out as we go along. And I see that some people are starting to respond to question 1, and I probably should have read it out loud. Question 1 is, what is the most important thing you learned today? So we really do want to know what you've learned and how you've, and then as you may anticipate, question 2 will be about how you use the information, but please go ahead and keep typing your responses to question 1, and I will go ahead and post question 2. Do any of the other presenters have anything else that you'd like to mention as we work our way through these evaluation questions?
No, I think, it'd be great if people can respond to the evaluation questions. And if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask, please do so in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you, Steve. And I'll go ahead and put the third question up, and that is, what webinar topics would you like to see presented in 2015? And this is specifically can be related to Eden webinars, could be related to Financial Security for All webinars, could be related possibly to network literacy or technology topics as well. So I think feel free to be wide open in your responses. This is certainly the time for planning webinars, so we'll all be curious to see what people are interested in.
I noticed Sandra from Iowa made a comment about how do we motivate people to prepare for disasters, and we as a team had that discussion. It's we all know we should do it, but we don't always get around to it. So good point. How do we motivate people?
And Steve, I don't know if you've noticed Marcia Gedding's question. One of her agents asked the question, with all the problems with hacking, what is the best thing to tell our audiences?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is that individuals need to be aware that whether they like it or not, they have information that is available, that is out online, and that it can be hacked in those sorts of cases. And so it's important that they take some responsibility in making sure that, for instance, simple steps like I don't use the same password for every site that I need to log into. For the simple reason that if it's lost from one site, you've now jeopardized everything else. It would be sort of like if everyone in your neighborhood all used the same key for their door, and then one person lost their key and now they can get into everyone's house. Probably not a good analogy, but best I could do on the fly. So I think it's important that people understand what those risks are. But the reality of it is that, for instance, in the target hacks, Most of what was lost was credit card information, and the way the laws in the United States are set up right now, you don't really have much liability for that. The credit card companies do, and then they go after the people like Target for that. There's some changes being made in the way credit cards will be used in the United States to more closely match what's going on in Europe, so it's harder for people to use stolen credit cards or stolen credit card information. But I guess what I try and tell people is, take small steps. Again, I think that came up in the question about motivation, is if you don't want to tell them all hope is lost. You also don't want to tell them that they need to come up with a 65-character password for every site that they ever log into, and remember those and make sure they don't write them down and all this stuff that makes it an insurmountable goal. So I would just say simple things. Make sure that you are not using the same password for Twitter that you are using for accessing your bank account, and things like that, and hopefully get people to take a step along the way.
Thanks, Steve. I'm just going to throw this out in case people haven't been able to see it, but Nancy from North Carolina is asking about publications on digital record keeping, passwords, etc. Also, how to handle digital records after death. And I don't know of a single publication, so if anyone does and wants to put the link in or some information about it, please enter that into the chat box. But perhaps that's a gap, something that we need to work on either through eExtension or through our state publication units. I think looks like the chatting has, well, we'll wait a little bit here. Maybe a couple of people are typing in response to that. It's kind of a last call for responses to the 3 evaluation questions. Remember, question 1 was, what is the most important thing you learned today? Question 2 is, how will you use the information? And then question 3, what webinar topics would you like to see presented? And I saw lots of very interesting responses to all 3 of those questions. So thanks to everyone for your responses. And keep typing a little bit. Any last words from Lori, Sarah, or Steve? We're coming up on the hour, so we're about done.
No, I am very happy to see all the comments and questions and conversation in the chat, and I think there are some great ideas here. One thing I would just say regarding the storing your digital files and stuff, I don't really think there are many extension services that have a lot of information on that, and it might be because there's not a strong research base for it. But there's a lot of that type of information available through financial education publications or financial publications like Money Magazine or those types of sites. The FTC has some information, and so there is information available, but I don't know that we have any specific extension information. So thank you, everyone, and I'll let Lori and Sarah talk.
This is Sarah. Thank you for coming to the webinar today, and feel free to contact us for more information. And we truly appreciate your response to the 3 questions. Thank you.
Also, a final thank you from Lori, and encourage you to check out the financial toolkit for recovering from disaster. It's an amazing tool for those who have had a home damaged through disaster.
Well, wonderful. Thanks to everyone, and we appreciate the participants who joined us today. And the link to the webinar was posted higher up in the chat box, but the recording will be posted on the Learn Events page that goes with this event. So take a look at it, refer back to it, and have a great afternoon.